Good afternoon, and welcome to the Carnegie Endowment. I'm very excited to see so many people here today for what I know will be a great discussion. We have I feel very lucky to be able to host Nadwa to speak today about what I think is really such a great topic, which is this issue of tribal conflict and conflict resolution in Yemen, in the tribal governorates of Yemen. I think in the last 3 months, we've all gone through a huge learning curve on Yemen. And running throughout much of the discussion and commentary has been this idea that outside of big urban cities, Yemen is somehow lawless or without any authority. And I think that's actually not the case at all. There's an alternative system of government or a different system, but there's not no system. And I think it's really critical that as we all gear up on Yemen and focus more and more on the country, that we understand how these systems work. Nadwa Dasari is a local conflict expert in Yemen. She is a MA from the UK and has been doing this work for 5-6 years, I think. She's now Executive Director of Partners Yemen and previously was with NDI. Nadwa's going to speak for about 25 minutes about her work and conflict and conflict resolution inside Yemen. And then Nabil Khouri is going to speak 5 or 10 minutes or so. Nabil's now at the State Department in the office, Near East and South Asia Office of Intelligence and Research, I believe. Was previously DCM in Yemen and Consul General in Morocco. So we're very lucky to have you with us today. With that, please, Nadwa.
Thanks, Chris. And I'm very happy to be here today to talk to you about tribal governance system in Yemen. I'm not sure I can, it was hard to prepare for this presentation because the system is very complex and it has a lot of details and processes, and I try to simplify it here. Well, first, I would like to give a little background about Partners Yemen and the kind of work we do. Partners Yemen is part of Partners for Democratic Change International, which is a group of 20 local centers in Eastern Europe, Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. As Partners Yemen, we try to promote a culture of change and conflict management in Yemen. And we focus our work in the eastern governorates of Marib, Al-Jawf, Shabwa, and Al-Bayda. These governorates are characterized by two things. They have high level of tribal conflicts, and they have strong tribal traditions and strong tribal conflict resolution systems. What we do to strengthen conflict management in Yemen or to promote conflict management in Yemen, we don't interfere in conflicts, we don't engage in mediation, direct mediation in conflicts, but what we do is we try to address the root causes of conflict, being the lack of development and development implementation challenges, issues like lack of funding, limited resources, limited capacity, corruption, lack of community participation in development, weak rule of law, and the deterioration of traditional conflict management practices. And our approach is we do that through strengthening existing and potential capacities for peace, local capacities for peace. We work at the local level, we work in the provinces themselves. We work, for example, existing capacities for peace. We work with tribal leaders, we work with religious leaders, we work with local authorities, we work with local councils, we work with local NGOs, women and youth. We help facilitating dialogue among stakeholders and promote cooperation among them. Again, we work exactly with the same groups that I just mentioned. And we work to promote conflict-sensitive and community-based development. We have 4 programs. The first program is the Development Dialogue Forum, and this program focuses on Marib governorates. It's a pilot program. In this program, we bring tribal and civic leaders from the Marib Governorate, and that includes elected local councils and local NGOs, along with the government of Yemen and local authorities, as well as donors, international organizations, and people basically who are interested in development in Marib. And the idea is that those people come together and discuss obstacles to development and stability in Marib, and then come up with solutions, initiatives to help bring investment and sound development to the government. 10 days ago, we had a 4-day symposium on the management of development in Marib. And in this picture here, the tribal and civic leaders from Marib are having a discussion over evening social, over development priorities and challenges in Marib with the representative of AID, USAID. This conversation went on, I think, for 2 hours that evening. It was really a great opportunity for AID personnel and the tribal leaders. We have the Women Leadership Program, and in this program, we work with 25 core women leaders. Now, our aim in this program, we aim to reach out to 40,000 women and youth population. But through the 25 leaders, which we invest in, we give them long training, 20 days of training, mentoring, and support to create a network of female volunteers and female leadership throughout Marib, Al-Jawf, and Shabwa, the 3 governorates, in order to disseminate messages that are necessary to promote development and address challenges that face development in the governorates. We have the local civil society strengthening program, and in this program we work with 20 small civil society organizations that are based in the governorates. Again, I mean, we give them training, we give them mentoring, and we give them small grants throughout 2 years. The 4th project is the community-based conflict mitigation program, and in this program we work with local partners to help preventing and resolving conflicts over development and natural resources, as well as conflict between local communities and corporations. This picture is from one of our trainings with the women. So to come to the tribal customary law, or what is called in Arabic, in Arabic is urf. It's based on consensus building. It relies on honor, collective responsibility, and the ability of a tribe to govern its own members. I tried to in this chart, I tried to sketch a comparison between the formal legal system and the customary law system. So in the formal court system, we have the Court of First Instance, the Court of Appeal, and then the Supreme Court. Equivalent in the tribal system, or in the tribal customary law system, we have the elders, the aqils, and those people usually deal with cases, simple cases like, personal status cases like marriages, divorces, inheritance, things like that. And then the second level is the sheikhs. And these people deal with conflicts. They deal with land disputes. They deal with revenge killings. They basically deal with all sorts of conflicts that happen in tribal areas. The third level, which is, they call it the maraga, which is the highest level sheikh. And those people, especially they come in when one party of the conflict or 2 parties of the conflict reject the decision of the sheikh. They have the right to appeal to a higher level sheikh, which is the maraga, what we call them in Yemen. In the customary law, there is the famous, what they call the rules of 70. And these rules are pre-Islamic. They were documented in the 1700s, and there are different interpretations why they call them the rules of 70, but I think the most likely one is that because they have 3 chapters and 70 rules, that's why they call them the rule of 70. And it basically, that first chapter of this rule of 70 deals with cases of homicide and abuse, and these are just examples that I brought from the under this category. So cases of homicide, protecting outsiders, revenge killings, harming women and children. And under this rule, under this general chapter, there are 12 rules. The second chapter deals with civil and public rights. And there are 46 rules under this chapter. And it deals with issues like tribal responsibility to its members, rights of travelers or temporary residents in tribal areas, regulating land use and water use and resources use, harming animals and cutting trees, and robbery, theft, basically issues that are public issues. And then the third chapter is the tribal adjudication, and it has 12 rules. Basically, this rule describes how the process of conflict resolution or mediation or arbitration takes place. Tribal conflict management. So I tried to put this chart, and I'll try to explain how it works. Most of the tribal conflicts are dealt with before they become violent, and they resolve before they become violent. So there is a lot of conflict prevention work that happens there. And I'll just try to describe how it happens. So if two tribes have conflict, the leaders, two things can happen. The leaders of the two tribes can get together if they sense that there is a conflict. They get together and they try to negotiate a solution. And that works many times. I mean, in most times it works. If they don't get together, they get pressure from members of their tribe to get together and negotiate. But if that doesn't happen, usually a third party who can be the leader of a neighboring tribe try to convince the leaders of the two parties to come together and negotiate. Sometimes that works, and they negotiate. Or in many cases also, he convinced them to choose an arbitrator. So, and the role of that third party in this case is a mediator. So the role of the mediator is to either to convince the two parties to get together and negotiate and come to a solution, or to get together and choose an arbitrator. Now they can agree on one arbitrator. And if they don't agree on one arbitrator, each one chooses his own arbitrator, and the two arbitrators choose a third one so that they have a third vote. Now, if they agree on the arbitrators, they need to bring guarantees. Usually, they give to the arbitration committee or the arbitrator some guns as a guarantee that they will honor or respect or implement the decision of the arbitrator. They also have to bring guarantors who should be people of high status, prominent leaders, people who are respected by all the parties. And the role of those people is to guarantee that the conflicting parties will implement the decision of the arbitrator. So that's how it works. And then the arbitration committee sits with the conflict parties together to look at the case, or also they have caucuses with them, and we have a term for caucus. It's called barza in the tribal customary law language. And then they study the case, and then they come with the decision. Now, if one of the parties does not like the decision, they can appeal to the higher level sheikh. And it's the same process. They put guarantees, and they bring guarantors, and it's so detailed. It's just very hard for me to explain it here, but I hope I'm being clear. So, and then after the arbitrators make their decision, and it's final, then comes the implementation. So how does the tribal law enforcement mechanisms work? Well, each tribe is responsible to make its members implement the decision of the arbitrator. The arbitrators know that the tribe is responsible to force or to make the members implement the decision. And if the member refuses to do so, the tribe has to implement it. Like if the member of the tribe is fined, say, to pay like 2 million, and then he refuses, then the tribe should pay that 2 million. But the tribe, under the customary law, has to kick out that tribal member. He is ashamed for the rest of his life because he dishonored his tribe by not respecting or implementing the arbitrator's decision. Now, what happens if the tribe itself does not do that, does not force its member or have its member implement the decision? The neighboring tribes pressure that tribe to do so, and it's a long process. I mean, they give them more than one chance. It's 8 days and then 8 days. They do flags, white flags and black flags, but I won't go into that process. But eventually, if the tribe refuses to do so, they boycott. They don't allow tribal members from that tribe to access their roads, territories, the markets. Basically, total embargo on that tribe. Key rules, which I thought were interesting, a mediator's role in a ceasefire in conflict zones. So when people are shooting at each other, when the conflict is already violent, mediators come, and these people's role is to stop the fighting. So they run into the conflict zone, they have white flags, they stop in the middle, they camp there, and it's the rule that the parties should stop. They stop, and then the mediator try to convince them to choose an arbitrator and to go through the process, basically. Safe havens in tribal traditions, public places like market, like mosques, these are safe havens, and conflict should not take place in those areas, and people should be safe in those areas. Ghorm, it's the equal share that members of a tribe give to an individual cause. So that can be marriage or fine or needing to go for medical treatment. Revenge killing rule. This is very interesting because under the tribal customary law, you have 3 shots and you are out. So if somebody kills a family member, that you have, the tribes try to convince you to take blood money, and if you refuse to take blood money, you have 3 shots. That if you meet the killer who killed your family member, you have only 3 shots, and if you miss the 3 shots, you have no right to kill this person whatsoever, and even you lose the right to get blood money.
And you're in.
Yeah. Refuge, asylum seeking, well, the tribes do not give asylum for everybody like that. If somebody seeks asylum to a tribe, that tribe study his case and see whether he is eligible to be asylumed or not. Like if he's somebody who did what they call in tribal culture a black shame, which is the worst kind of shame, like killing a woman or killing a guest or things like that, then they don't give him refuge. Or in some cases, they give him refuge if he didn't do black shame. They give him refuge, but the tribe is entitled to make a decision about his case. So if he's killed someone, then the tribe makes punish him. And, women, and I know there is a lot of misperceptions about tribal women in Yemen. But one thing I want to say is that women enjoy and give access during conflict. In tribal culture, women are protected during conflict. They have access. It's a black shame to harm a woman in tribal culture. They go back and forth during conflict. They have access, not like men. And men, when they are accompanied by women, they have access. It's also a black shame to kill a man if he's accompanied by a woman. And that's consequences for attacking a woman. Usually, the penalties for harming a woman is much higher than the penalties for harming a man, and it can go to 44 times the blood money of a man if a woman is killed, depending on the case. And then women make decisions about their marriage. They choose whom they want to marry. They divorce men if they don't like them. And there is an interesting rule in tribal culture that if a woman does not like her husband anymore, and he wouldn't divorce her, so what she does, she cut a piece of her hair and she goes to the tribal leader, and that's basically, that guy will be ashamed for the rest of his life because he's forcing a woman against her will to stay with him even though she doesn't like him. And women have influence in conflict. The people that we meet argue that women are the ones who fuel conflict because they push the men to take revenge. Most of the women that we meet with acknowledge that. So they have influence, and I think any effort to reduce conflict should start with women. Advantages of and strengths of the customary law: it's fast, it's more efficient, trusted, and it's usually the verdict is accepted by parties of the conflict. This is an interesting case. I was traveling in Marib. This is in Marib, and this group of young men, they are students in Marib College. And what they did, there is a tribe that controls the road between Marib and Sana'a, the capital city, and that tribe had some conflict with the government. They kidnapped a bus, the bus that takes the professors who teach in Marib College every day back and forth between Sana'a and Marib, because they don't stay in Marib, they stay in Sana'a, the professors. So these kids wanted their professors back. They wanted the bus release, and they went to the authorities, and it didn't work. They tried with the authorities. They called, I don't know, security, and it just didn't work. So what they did, they kidnapped 3 cars from that belonged to members of the tribe which kidnapped the bus, so to force a negotiation. And then a negotiation took place, and the bus was released the next day. Now, challenges. I mean, there is a lot of challenges that are faced. Increasingly, there are challenges that face the traditional conflict mitigation systems or the customary law. Revenge killing and the truce renewal dilemma. Like I said, most of the conflicts get resolved before they become violent. But when they become violent, and especially when they involve revenge killing, then when they become complicated and very difficult to resolve. Usually the tribes negotiate a 1-year truce during which people can travel safely between the tribal areas and across territories. But once that truce ends, sometimes they succeed in negotiating extension another year, but when it ends, it's back to the situation where people cannot cross territories because of the conflict. These 3 kids in this picture, they could not go to finish their high school education, which is, the school is outside their territory, for 3 years because of the conflict and revenge killing. And luckily, this case, this was one of the most complicated conflicts in the Jawf Governorate, and it was resolved about 5 months ago, finally. The second challenge that I see is the rising levels of conflict in a weakening tribal tradition. The tribal tradition in the past used to deal with traditional society. People had, they work in land, they had jobs. I mean, it was just a simple society. Now we have increasing poverty, more people, high unemployment, young people. They have to deal with emerging state role. They have to deal, there are corporations in there. So there are new things that are coming to tribal area that are causing conflict. And it's becoming more and more difficult to the tribal system to maintain the level of stability and order, I guess, due to these challenges. In this picture, this is one of the most complicated conflicts in Al-Jawf. It's been there for about 30 years and claimed the life of over 80 people. And only 4 weeks ago, or 4 weeks or 5 weeks, in January, about 11 people were killed in that conflict, and that's because a group of kids decided to ambush another group of kids from the other tribe. And I think the youth dimension here is very important because they're unemployed, they have poor education, and so they engage in conflict. So I guess what I want to say is that the traditional systems, because of these challenges, the traditional systems are weakening. They're still strong, they're still effective, and they're still managing to achieve stability and order in tribal areas, but they're weakening because of the challenges I just mentioned. And we have, on the other hand, weak and ineffective formal system. And that's because of that, there is a vacuum, I think, which can lead to instability. Now, the question I want to put is how can this vacuum be addressed, and what can be taken from the traditional system, which has a lot of positive aspect to it, that can help in managing this vacuum, and how can that be done? Are there creative ways in which we can integrate the traditional system into the formal system? How can we maintain both the formal and the traditional without undermining either? So, okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think it's fascinating stuff. Nabil, please.
All right. I must say, I always admire this arrangement that Carnegie has. It always reminds me of the atmosphere in Rick's Cafe in Casablanca when I come in. Until I sit over here and feel the interrogation lights in my face. But also the distance, those way in the back are a little too far to see. I wish you were closer up here, if nothing else, so that I can see whether you're smiling or frowning when you interrogate me and or interrogate us on the panel. This is, Nadwa, this is wonderful, really. Ginny Hill and I were both at this all-day event on Yemen yesterday at NDU, and we didn't talk about tribes once. This is exactly what's missing in a lot of the discussions on Yemen. It gives you in-depth insights into the real society, and also the context in which a lot of the local and regional politics take place. I feel a bit like the bad cop here who has to sort of bring in the regional and international factors, which are a bit of an ugly intrusion into an otherwise somewhat idyllic picture of the tribal system in Yemen, which is really lovely when you think of it, despite all the problems and despite all the occasional things getting out of hand and revenge killings and whatnot. The program that you're working on is excellent, and I'm aware of when you started it with NDI, and the famous Robin Madrid, who is back checking on her tribal friends in Yemen right now. The two of you were great partners, and the program is excellent in that it brings the tribal context into the overall discussion of development, modernization, reforms, and many of us miss that. It's an essential context. It is also troublesome. This is the one program I know where Yemen is otherwise has been very open to international NGOs working on reform issues. This is the one program that really elicited President Saleh's personal attention and personal dislike. And we at the US Embassy, because NDI is an American NGO and had a US government grant for many of its programs, had to talk to the Minister of Interior and even at one point to the President to say this is really not against you in any way and try to point out the benefits. Unfortunately, Saleh understands how politics in Yemen works better than anyone. And he understands that this is the nerve, the center of Yemeni politics. And he is a master at playing this game, and he does not like anyone else playing in his field. And he understands that that's where a lot of regional actors sometimes manage to penetrate the system and play it against him. And so I understand the sensitivity, but at the same time, I think this is something that ought to be done. Now, the thing is that Yemen is probably the last holdout in the region in terms of having a fully intact tribal system. We saw the contradictions. Iraq is another country where the tribal system was, before the war, still pretty intact. It has suffered severe shocks, particularly from Al-Qaeda and from the intrusion of international war. Something like Al-Qaeda particularly shakes the traditional linkages and traditional systems in place. In Yemen, this hasn't quite happened yet, although we may be beginning to witness it. Nevertheless, it's something that should be taken into account. And what I would introduce here is that the mitigation of conflict is a very important concept, and it's something that is needed as these tribes are transitioning from the old system to hopefully a modern state system. However, the old issues which used to cause tribal warfare, traditionally land, water, brides liking or not liking their bridegrooms, etc., are making way to the more regional and international issues right now. The main problems of facing Yemen, in addition to the core economic issues and scarcity issues, are the security issues that affect the north of Yemen, the south of Yemen, as well as the middle where Al-Qaeda is playing. And these issues are at once security-related and socially and politically related. They're socially and politically related because they've gone beyond the traditional this tribe against that tribe or this tribe against the state. They touch on something Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau referred to as the social contract, the agreement between the tribes and the agreement unwritten between the state and the tribes, and all the complex rules, some of which Nadwa elaborated on. These are being seriously questioned right now. The main distribution of resources, the distribution of power and decision-making are causing the North to rethink the relationship with the government, and therefore the war that you have. A war of this nature, of this size, doesn't take place for so long over minor issues. The war which may be about to break out, and we all hope does not break out with the South, another secession attempt perhaps, is also on the basic issues of distribution, power distribution, political, economic, security. The South is questioning in a basic way what it gets out of that union. Al-Qaeda has intruded itself on the country and has been using it. It used it in the past as a place to come in and out, recruit, equip, and then go fight in the north, to now a place where they are basing themselves and running operations in Yemen and out of Yemen. All these three conflicts polarize the tribes. so that now in the north, the tribes are split between supporting the Houthis, fighting against the Houthis, and therefore supporting the government and Saudi Arabia, and those that are in between and hope to sit it out and see what happens in the end. In the south, the same way, tribes are under pressure. Are you going to stay in the union, or are you against the union? Are you with the secessionists? Tough questions. And with Al-Qaeda, you have young men being recruited out of tribes. And this is, the tribes are not comfortable with, transnational terrorism is not something that the tribes have practiced traditionally. It's not something they believe in. They have their own issues they'd rather stay with. Thank you very much. But it's a problem when one of your young lads joins the party and comes back home and brings in friends, and then as a tribe, what do you do with him? What do you do with his friends? So there are lots of tensions on this old system. And I'm afraid sooner or later it will have to give way to something else. The thing that is perhaps most positive to focus on is the question you posed at the end, which is how creative can you be in bridging the gap in integrating the traditional system with the new ideas for development, reforms, etc. The tribes can actually be a very nice bridge from the old to the new. I'm not someone who looks down on the tribal system as something archaic. On the contrary, I think the politics that has been taking place the last 30 years or so in Yemen, and the juggling of tribal interests and the way Saleh has survived all the maneuvers against him and with him, is really politics at its core, at its most basic. Politics is who gets what, when, and how. And in Yemen, it's the tribes and what they get and don't get and how they get it. And the agreement has been that you observe certain rules and regulations, and in return, I will make sure that you have what you need in terms of goods and services, but I will also respect your turf, which means the state doesn't even send a policeman into a particular village without the consent of that tribal sheikh or leader in that village. It's a system that worked well for many years with occasional lapses. But right now it's under greater pressures than the traditional pressures. I will end with, I think Paul Dresch in his quotes Saleh and the one time he did have a conversation with Saleh and asked him something about the tribes and how can you move from the tribes to the modern state, and Saleh looked at him puzzled and said, the tribes are the state, essentially. I mean, he said it differently, but I imagine it's quite an alternative to Napoleon's l'état c'est moi, the state is me. Saleh didn't say that. He said the state is the tribes. The tribes are the state. And that's very wise and shows how he understands the system in which he operates. Your main constituents as a ruler in Yemen are the tribes. And as you bridge over, whether through, and the local council idea is an excellent one, as at the local level you bring in the tribes as members of the local council, because they are constituents of that small local body of government. And you grow from there. You connect to the regional councils, you connect to parliament and the government that way. And as you have NGOs that are secular, modern, and liberal, and you have individuals, they are constituents as well. And you transition gradually that way. You don't just legislate out the tribes. You cannot do that. You have to work with them. So with that end, and we'll be happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate both of you, because I think the one thing that I think comes through in all of this is how this system is under stress, and the tensions I think that both of you brought out is really important and critical for us to understand as we deal more and more with Yemen. I'd like to open this up for questions, and we have some microphones coming around, so I would just ask you to please identify yourself, and we'll take them in some groups. So there's a woman in the back with a green.
Hi, I'm Lynn Carter. I work with MSI, and I once lived in what was then North Yemen for 4 years. Nedwa, can you speak a little bit about what you have learned in promoting conflict mitigation over the last 4 years for 2 organizations, about how to do it better, and about what the limits are of what an outside organization, particularly an American organization, can do in that environment? Thanks.
Laura.
Laura Schultz from the Congressional Research Service. I wanted to pick up on one of the points you made, Nedwa, about the role of youth and the youth bulge as a challenge and also an opportunity. But based on your work and observations, what are some of your impressions in terms of how youth are envisioning their role vis-a-vis tribes? Is it still, tribal identity is first, Yemeni second? Is it something different? What are your impressions in terms of this very young generation growing up vis-a-vis their identity? Thank you.
And John, in the back.
Thank you. John Iskander from the Foreign Service Institute. And it's really for both of you. The question, it seems to me, listening to you, that on the one hand, you're saying the system is largely intact, under stress, but historically, the danger to the tribal system is not the kind of stresses that you're talking about, it's the state itself. And it seems to me that the stronger the state is, the less effective the tribes can be, and the state will eventually compete with them for authority. So in the sense that what we all, in principle, are working for is better and more effective state, then doesn't that in itself undermine the tribes? And how do you deal with that contradiction when the tribes fulfill a positive function? Thank you.
Well, from my experience, how conflict management work can be done better, I have learned 2 things. First, to work closely with the government and the local authorities. It makes the work a lot easier and more effective. You talked about my experience with NDI, and I think one mistake that we did when I was with NDI is that we did not coordinate with the government very closely. The other lesson I learned is that there is a need to work with the local people at the local level. So involve local NGOs, involve local councils, involve tribal leaders and communities. You cannot do work in tribal areas with communities without involving the tribal leaders, and you cannot do work without involving the local authorities as well and the government. So it's important to bring everyone. And the limits for an outside organization. I think an outside organization can facilitate and then let the local people decide for themselves what they can do. So an outside organization should not come with an advocacy agenda, for example. The question about the youth and identity, the youth do identify themselves as Yemenis, but they do identify themselves with their tribes because the tribes provide them protection. You want to answer the question about the state? And
Sure. I think we both talked about that. The strong state, does it undermine the tribe? Eventually. I mean, the idea is that you have to experience some kind of a transition. As quaint as the tribal system is, unfortunately, historically, this gives way to a modern state with modern institutions, which exist more or less on paper in Yemen, but aren't fully functional yet. And what I'm suggesting is that the transition is by accepting, first of all, recognizing the reality of the tribes and integrating them into the state as you're building modern democratic institutions. Gradually, their mechanisms become less relevant. And speaking of strong states, I mean, it depends on what you mean by a strong state. Dictatorship like Saddam's in Iraq, that's a different kettle of fish with the tribes versus a more genuinely democratic society in Yemen, where Saleh could not be a dictator even if he wanted to, simply because of the rebellious nature of the Yemenis not accepting authority so easily, and the fact that the tribal system functions. Each tribe is proud of its authority, of its turf. And so it's really more ready for democracy, for transitioning into democracy than some other less tribal societies. And a strong state is not necessarily a dictatorship, but it's one that has good institutions that are useful and that are actually used by the people. And I'll make one comment on the identity question. That's why I said with something like Al-Qaeda, there is the youth who go towards Al-Qaeda, which is a transnational organization, it doesn't recognize states, let alone tribes. And therefore, if a young man is particularly attached to his tribe, he would be unlikely to go into an organization like Al-Qaeda. If someone is shaky on the margin, then yes. And so there's a natural tension between do you belong to the tribe or to that organization.
Can I just add one thing? Also about the point about the tribe seeing the strengthening of the state as to undermine their authority. I think from my experience working in tribal areas for the last 6 years, and I'm just saying what the tribal leaders tell me, they are desperate for a strong state. The tribal leaders particularly spend a lot of their time managing conflict and preventing conflict and at the expense of their lives, their own lives. You know, there is no tribal leader that I know who doesn't have a son or a cousin or a relative who was not affected by conflict. They have mobility issues sometimes. So I think the tribes, I agree with you, that the tribal areas, the tribes are very ready for that kind of transition.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Oh, just a minute. Right. Yeah.
Steve Itterwill, Research for Common Ground for NADWA. When you presented the different challenges of working in Yemen, you said that one of them was a lack of community participation in development work. Can you elaborate more on this? Why is that the case? Thank you.
Pastor Mack, there's a microphone coming.
David Mack, the Middle East Institute. I'd like Nabil's comments, but also Nedwa's comments on the dilemma for the United States government when there is an issue of tribal justice or urf that involves an American, either an American who is a fugitive from U.S. justice or a threat to the United States, potential threat to the United States, or an American for whom we have protective responsibility. He was kidnapped from some tourist group. There must be a temptation for the U.S. government to deal directly with tribal authorities. Is there? I mean, but I can see there are probably downsides in terms of our relationship with the central government. Sometimes when the central government, it might be better to deal through the central government with the tribal authorities. Could you both talk a little bit about, from your own different perspectives, of the right and wrong way of going about this?
Please.
Raymond Schonholtz with Partners for Democratic Change. Can you build a little bit on the earlier answers you both gave? What would tribal democracy look like in Yemen if that's the fundamental base out of which the institutional structures might be built? Or is that a political contradiction in your mind, and when you, particularly Nabil, when you mention institutional structures? But if there's such a long history, if there's such a psychology of rebelliousness, as you had said, a kind of pride in that, what would it look like if you were to take it from a different perspective and talk about it as tribal democracy? What would the institutional structures then look like?
Why don't we start with those and then we'll get to the others.
So the first question about the community participation, it's basically, we just had a symposium 10 days ago, and it was about the management of development. And the core issue was the lack of community participation and why the communities participate less in the process of development. I think a big part of it is that the people who are managing the development process at the national level and at the local level are not fully aware about the importance and value that the communities can bring to development planning and implementation and monitoring. So that's the question about the community participation. I'm not sure I understood your question. I'm not sure I understood your question. If you could rephrase your question.
Conditions in which there is an American involved with tribal authority. Conditions in which an American is involved with tribal authority and is viewed by the U.S. government either as a fugitive from U.S. justice and a potential threat, or, on the other hand, an American who needs protection. Perhaps he was kidnapped, for example, or perhaps it's an American spouse of a Yemeni and there's a marriage dispute. There must be, I know, having from my own experience, there's a temptation on the part of the U.S. government to get involved directly with tribal authorities. But what sort of problems does this cause? Is it better to try to deal with the tribal authorities through the central government? What are the upsides and downsides?
That's a very naughty question, by the way. As someone with inside information, you know that there are cases like that, some in the past and some possibly ongoing. When I was the deputy chief of mission in Yemen, and we had cases involving American citizens or spouses, American spouses of Yemeni citizens, either way, the Yemeni government was generally helpful and was sympathetic. As long as the person is an American citizen, they don't mind helping us get back that citizen or do something with that citizen. When it's a dual nationality, it's a problem. It's a red line for Saleh to hand over someone who's a Yemeni citizen, extradition treaty or not. He feels that that's a matter of national pride, does not look on that sympathetically. The tribes factor into it. If the, again, going back to the Al-Qaeda analogy and identification, when the bad person has tribal linkages and they are Yemeni, the tribe feels that it has to protect them. The state has to negotiate, and the state is somewhere in between that person, the tribe, and the U.S. government saying this is a bad person, they've broken the law, etc. Generally speaking, yes, I mean, there is a temptation to deal directly with the tribe only when you have good relations with the tribes. I don't think we've traditionally been very good at dealing with the tribes because we haven't had the benefit of programs like Nadwas and Robin Madrid and people who have extended their relationships into the tribal system. We did have a defense attaché and a good friend of mine that we referred to as David of Arabia, because he loved to go out and meet people in the tribal areas and had friends. But it's a rare Foreign Service officer these days, particularly in a security-sensitive environment, that ventures too far from the capital or from urban areas. In addition, the sensitivity of the local government, Saleh in particular, to having you meddle directly with the tribes. I think we should have a relationship with the tribes. And that is something that whether Saleh or any other Arab ruler will accommodate and adjust to. As we say, we have to have relations directly with your citizens. It can't be just government to government. It's in everybody's interest. You can, but in the end, if it's a security matter, you really have to respect the authority of the state and work with them.
I'm not sure how tribal democracy will look like, Ray. I mean, the tribal leaders, the tribesmen are part of the current system, which is, there are tribal leaders who are MPs, who are elected local officials, who are consultative council members, and they're basically integrated in this system. And so I'm not sure how a tribal democracy will look like if it is different from this.
Yeah.
My name is Ellen Levinson and Levinson and Associates. First, one little comment on this idea of community and tribes together and how they work together. It's kind of interesting in local administration. I think there are some very good examples of tribal leaders playing the role now in a governmental setting, you know, more of a local council setting of activating and mobilizing their community in support of projects and positive developments. I think there is that, you know, that kind of cross-pollination, which is a positive, like you're talking about, that happens. But my question is less about, you know, the political system and about the economic system, because tribal tradition, there's certain work you can do and certain work you can't do, certain roles you can play and you can't play. For young men, it's kind of strict, as well as for women. And now we're looking at a modern economy, not just a modern government, but the economy itself. And how do you have young people who, you know, think of, you know, being soldiers or, you know, not even farming themselves, but, you know, overseeing farms and staying home and doing that kind of thing and then negotiating on the trade piece only of your farmland? How do you move into a mercantile system? We have seen it, you know, with large sheikhs and large, you know, certain tribal leaders have big masses of funds and money and business. But it's an interesting transition. I'm just wondering how you see that, both of you, Nabil and Nedwa. And it's a challenge as you move forward, especially since now we talk about lack of employment and economic growth and opportunity.
Marina.
Yes. Marina Ottawa with the Carnegie Endowment. I want to pick up on this last point, really, this issue of, you know, do we have any business engaging with the tribes and so on? A couple of things. First of all, we had a meeting earlier this week, I think, also on Yemen, but we brought in more of a comparative perspective. And one of the speakers was talking about Somalia and the experience in Somalia. There are obviously a lot of interesting parallels that one can draw. And he was talking about the fact that the one part of the country which is at peace in Somalia, which is northern Somalia or Somaliland, in fact, it's at peace not because it has a good government, but because the government is so totally ineffective that the country is being run by tribal elements. And the problem, though, is that, as he was saying, it sounds very good. The village elders are making, the elders of the clans are making the decision and so on. And his point was, well, there are elders and elders. There are good elders and bad elders, and not all the elders are wise. So that essentially you get into the same problems of violation of human rights that and so on, that you get with any other form of government. It does not mean that the elders are always bad, but they're people like everybody else, so that you get this very mixed bag. And I think that is something which is important to keep in mind, because I think what you describe there is an idealized system. That's the way in which it's supposed to work. Well, like all systems, is how well do they actually work in practice? How much this is, and this is as true of a modern system as it is true of a more tradition-based system. But the specific question that I want, when we start talking about engaging with the, relating directly to the tribes and so on, is the issue whether we should engage directly with the tribes, or is the issue whether we should simply engage with whatever official level of, the level of government that is there, with the local government, knowing full well that in the end we are not, we are not dealing necessarily with elected leaders, but we are dealing with traditional leaders that have gotten into these elected positions. Because I'm very skeptical about our ability, US government or anybody else essentially as outsiders, is ever getting it right concerning the participation, dealing with this with these groups.
Thank you, Alan Kieswetter with CNO Resources, the Middle East Institute. I'd like to follow up a little bit on the comments about the natural tension between the tribes and Al-Qaeda. I find that reassuring, and I guess I hope it's true. But there's a far different perception that is popular, and I just quote from the map on the back here, which says Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula has deep connections with Yemeni tribes and plenty of potential recruits. So how does this work? Is one wrong, or it must be much more nuanced?
If it's in a Carnegie publication, it cannot be wrong. Must be.
Well, it's actually from the Atlantic, but the perception is common that there are common interests here, and it's not just sort of the margins of the tribe that are being recruited, but rather deeper connections.
Yeah. Do you want me to go ahead?
Let's do one more in the back, and then we'll.
Yeah, Diana Greenwald from the Middle East Youth Initiative at Brookings. Nadwa, I wanted to ask, and perhaps also Nabil as well, it's my impression that there's a lot of migration going on among young people searching for employment in Yemen from rural areas into the city, or perhaps smaller groups outside of Yemen moving to the Gulf, and et cetera. Is that occurring in the Eastern governance that you're working in? Is it a large percentage of young people? And if so, what effect does that have on sort of tying into the earlier question on sort of identity and connection to their tribes?
Well, the economic issue about how like young people move from being soldiers to being engaged in formal economy. I guess that's my understanding of the question. I think it's a matter of opportunity. Young people, if they don't have opportunities, then they will be soldiers. I was in this discussion with the young people in Marib. We basically were talking about development and challenges to them as young people, and one thing that one of the young kids struck me. He said, "We have bad education, we don't have jobs, we have only two options: to join Al-Qaeda or the Houthis." So I think it's a matter of opportunity. And if there is opportunity, I think this whole soldier thing will disappear eventually. The question of how do we engage with the tribes, I think I don't think we should engage with the tribes as tribes. I think we should engage with local structures in the tribal areas. We should engage, or you should engage. with, like I said, local councils, local NGOs. Tribal leaders can be part of it, but I don't think we should engage only, or you should engage only with the tribes. The Al-Qaeda has deep connection with the tribes. I mean, I think that's a completely arbitrary sentence, and I don't know what the evidence for that. I think a lot of the things that I read in newspapers that say that Al-Qaeda has deep connections with the tribes or have embedded itself in the tribes are based on some, I mean, I don't know, based on some analyses, I guess, that are not very well researched. So I challenge that. Migration, yes, it happens in eastern governorates. They go to the main cities. There are limited opportunities to the Gulf, unfortunately, but they move to Sana'a particularly because it has more job opportunities than other areas. Again, they represent themselves as people who come from tribal areas, from certain tribe, and they represent themselves as Yemenis, but they still have that strong tribal identity.
Maybe begin with that last question on Al-Qaeda. Look, ideologically, structurally, sociologically, there is a contradiction between belonging to a group like Al-Qaeda because of its transnational goals and tactics, etc., versus the tribe, which is very much locally focused. And any youth caught in between will feel that tension. Politically, at the regional and international level, it translates into opportunities, problems and opportunities. And we've seen that in Iraq, where the tribes resented the advent of foreign fighters from outside, even though they were mostly Arab, but they were not Iraqi. And that created a natural tension. The tribe lost some of its authority because some of its youth went and joined these groups. And what you have now is the residual, as many of the foreign fighters left. Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which is a local outgrowth, is still a reality. But the fact is, in the end, I think the international community was more successful in prying away the tribes from that organization. And that's why I think Al-Qaeda, including Al-Qaeda in Iraq, are on a downward slope in Iraq. In Yemen, because Al-Qaeda is relatively new as an organization trying to base itself in the country and build from there, it worries us if they make inroads into the tribes. Now, they haven't been very clever tactically in other places in the region. They're trying to be a bit clever in Yemen. They have made some inroads, but I would say they remain superficial inroads. By and large, they have not infiltrated the tribes very well. There is some sympathy for them in some areas, but in general, the tribes are still fiercely independent and resent Al-Qaeda as much as they resent the state infiltrating them and telling them what to do. So it's a good story there, I think, so far. For young, should we work with the tribes' the ability to do so? In some cases, you have to. I mean, there are places. Again, it's the motive, whether you're doing it to meddle or you're doing it because it's part of the normal doing business. In Yemen, I don't know about Somalia, but if you go with your, I think, if you go with your state security as U.S. ambassador or a diplomat to go visit a tribe, at some point your state security peels off and your local tribal security takes over. You are under the protection of the sheikh now. No longer Sheikh Saleh, but Sheikh in Ma'rib or Jof or wherever. And so you have to deal with the tribe at some level. Now, hopefully, there is a coordination between the state and the visiting diplomat and the local sheikh. So I think, yeah, in those cases, definitely we should. And just speaking of programs that you have, economic, whatever in nature, where you're trying to build a well in a particular area, if you don't deal with the tribes, you're going to run into a problem. We've run into that where sometimes AID goes innocently and digs a well somewhere, and then tribal warfare starts because they dug it on this side of the tribal border, not that side. So you got to talk to people and say, what's the arrangement here? Can you both share this well and work it out that way? So we could and we should work with the tribe. And not as a substitute to the state, but just as a local reality. On the economic issue that Alan asked, I think because the economy in Yemen is quite underdeveloped, in Somalia even worse, of course. So there aren't these opportunities. I mean, Nadwa talked about opportunities for employment. But it's also opportunities for investment, so that if you're a young person involved in growing ghat, packaging, selling the ghat, or drawing the water from the well for the ghat, etc., and that's all you have, then that's all you're going to do. And as that becomes increasingly frustrating, you might go do other things. But as we, in the international community, work with and assist countries like that, then you need to provide investment and the opportunity for young people like that to invest in something else. Many possibilities. Microenterprise comes to mind as something which AID and other international organizations have invested in the region, which is you provide small loans, sometimes like $1,000, for good ideas. You advertise them well, working through the tribal system, and say, anybody who wants to start something new, bring us your project. And sometimes I know in Egypt, people came with these drums, the traditional drums that they use, and they wanted to put a plastic cover instead of a sheepskin cover, as a way, because you have more supplies, it's more industrially practical, etc. And the group that was providing the money thought that was a good idea and did it, and that business started with very little money and now has grown. As you go in and you look for ideas and provide small grants, then you diversify the economy, and you bring these young people out from the tribal limitations into more possibilities, and they can become direct interlocutors and people who can deal with international organizations. I'm not sure if that answers the question in the back. It was related, I think, right?
I wish we had more time to continue this discussion, but would you like to say something?
There is one thing that I want to also add to what Nabil is saying. Also, I think one important thing to do to help those areas is to give the opportunity for young people in those areas to get exposed to other cultures. This is something that I'm preaching, but it's also something that tribal people, tribal leaders, and tribal young men feel very strongly about. That if young people from tribal areas have the opportunity to travel outside their countries, it doesn't have to be like a 2-year master's program or 4-year BA program or something. I mean, it can be like a short-term study tour or exchange program, and it doesn't have to be in the United States. It can be in Jordan or Lebanon, just to give them the kind of exposure to other cultures and what's happening in other countries. I mean, I saw how that changed people from tribal areas, young people from tribal areas that we work with, and their attitude, the way they think about their future and their areas, and their engagement in trying to address key issues in their areas is really something very valuable. And it's different from the attitude of people who have never got good education or exposure to other cultures. I mean, I saw that in myself. I mean, 1 year of study in England changed me a lot. Like I got a lot of the perceptions I had challenged. And then another year in the US, I guess, also added a lot to myself. Thanks.
I think this has been a great discussion, and I think we're really just at the beginning of this discussion and kind of understanding how important tribal systems are and the changes and the tensions that are ongoing within these systems. You know, I think as with everything in related to Yemen, it always raises so many more questions, and I hope this is just the start of this conversation. Oftentimes, I feel like I get this question about local capacity in Yemen, and every time someone asks me about Yemen's capacity to do things, I always think of Nadwa, and I'm really excited that you were able to be here today to talk about the work you've been doing. So please join me in thanking Nadwa and Nabil for coming out and sharing some of their knowledge.